During the Second World War, some countries fielded units so terrifying that other countries would gamble an astonishing amount of resources just to nullify the threat. These units didn't always look the same, but they had the potential to compromise supply lines, take out entire military forces, and even win the war. In this video, we're going to discuss 3 of these highly threatening units. The first air fleet of the Japanese Navy, also known as the Kido Butai, was deployed to take care of the most significant threat the Japanese faced in the Pacific, the US Pacific Fleet. It played a major role in the attack on Pearl Harbor and consequently put itself right in the center of the US military's spotlight. The US Navy sought its revenge in the Battle of Midway, which took place between the 3rd and the 6th of June, 1942. Midway is a small atoll in the Hawaiian archipelago and was absolutely vital during the war. This was because it was an ideal location for refueling planes on trans-Pacific flights. For this reason, among others, a Marshal Admiral of the Japanese Navy, Isoroku Yamamoto, devised a plan to lure US naval aircraft carriers to the island, where they could sink them and subsequently take control of the island. They planned to send Kido Butai units to fulfill this objective, along with 4 other fleets. In the Kido Butai alone, there would be 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, all of which had participated in the attack on Pearl Harbor. Unbeknownst to the Japanese, the Americans had recently broken the Japanese naval code and became aware of the impending attack. They quickly mobilized to catch the Japanese force off guard and sink the very fleet that had sunk theirs months earlier. The US Navy sent 3 fleet carriers, 7 heavy cruisers, 15 destroyers, 16 submarines, and 360 aircraft, far outweighing the Japanese force. US dive bombers attacked on June 4th. While the first wave was struck down by the Japanese, the next wave sunk the carriers Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu. The remaining carrier, Hiryu, launched a counterattack that sunk the US carrier Yorktown. That didn't kill the American spirit, however. A follow-up wave of bombers quickly sunk the Hiryu. Just like that, the Kido Butai lost nearly half of its carriers. The battle continued for 2 more days, but there was little the Japanese could do. Not only were 4 of their carriers below the waves, they also lost almost 300 aircraft, a heavy cruiser, and as many as 3,000 men, 200 of which were some of Japan's best pilots. By comparison, the US lost 1 carrier, 1 destroyer, 145 aircraft, and around 360 men. The American gamble to launch a sneak attack paid off, without a doubt. The German battleship Bismarck was a major threat to the Allies, not because of what it had done, but what it could do. The first German-built battleship since World War I, the Bismarck was bigger, heavier, and faster than any Allied vessel. In fact, it was the largest warship afloat at the time it launched. Considered unsinkable by the Third Reich, the battleship's mission was to disrupt Allied supply lines in the North Atlantic. The United States was sending oil, food, and other essentials to Britain, and if the Bismarck could sever those lines, Britain would fall. The Bismarck entered the Atlantic in May 1941 under the cover of darkness, accompanied by the Prince Eugen, a favorite heavy cruiser of the Kriegsmarine. When the British caught wind of the Bismarck's location, they dispatched 6 destroyers along with the battleship HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Hood, the Royal Navy's largest battlecruiser and once the most powerful warship in the world, to find her. And find her they did. This was at 5 a.m. on May 24th in the Denmark Strait between Iceland and Greenland. Hood opened fire on Bismarck, which returned fire and sunk Hood in just 4 minutes. Unable to match the Bismarck's power, the Prince of Wales concentrated on pulling survivors out of the water, and the Bismarck slipped away, damaged but still operational. The Royal Navy knew that its best shot at taking down the mighty German ship would be to hit it before it reached port for repairs. An aircraft carrier sailing north from the Iberian Peninsula, the HMS Ark Royal, was ordered to hunt down the wounded ship. The Navy loaded the ship's old biplanes with torpedoes, and the planes took off into stormy skies in search of the Bismarck. Flying through heavy winds and rain, the British planes accidentally attacked one of their own ships, the HMS Sheffield. Fortunately, the torpedoes detonated early and the ship wasn't damaged. The planes flew back to the Ark Royal to resupply before taking off again and identifying the correct target. They managed to strike the Bismarck's weakest point, its rudders. They then wiped out the ship's steering mechanisms and tore a massive hole in the hull. Though it was crippled and surrounded by enemies, the Bismarck didn't surrender, so the Royal Navy deployed 3 more warships to deliver the final blow. The HMS Dorsetshire fired its torpedoes at the Bismarck, and at 10:40 a.m. on the 27th of May, the unsinkable ship sank under the waves of the Atlantic. The British supply lines were saved. In 1940, France owned one of the most powerful navies in the world. But when it signed an armistice with Germany, the French Navy's future became uncertain. If Germany gained control of the French fleet, the Axis would likely dominate the seas. Under the terms of the armistice, Germany stated that it solemnly and firmly declared that it had no intention of making demands regarding the French fleet during the peace negotiations. In fact, the fleet was to remain neutral for the rest of the war. However, that did little to comfort the British, who were terrified of the Germans going back on their promise and commandeering the French fleet. The French assured the British that if the Germans tried to take over the fleet, they would scuttle the ships. But the British still didn't trust the situation. Churchill demanded that the fleet either be handed over to the British or neutralized in such a way that the Axis could never recover it. At the time, the French fleet wasn't wholly in France. Its ships were scattered all over. There were French ships in the British ports of Plymouth and Portsmouth, which the British seized in July 1940, but the French also had ships at various ports in North Africa, including the port of Alexandria in Egypt and the port of Mers-el-Kébir in French Algeria. 2 Royal Navy units were sent to these ports to negotiate with the French admirals, with the goal of either seizing or neutralizing the fleet. While negotiations went well in Alexandria, the same cannot be said for Mers-el-Kébir. The British force arrived off the coast of Algeria on July 3rd with the battlecruiser Hood, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, and the battleships Valiant and Resolution, and a few cruisers and destroyers. The negotiations at Algeria were the most important because the fleet there contained some of the strongest ships in the French Navy, including 6 destroyers, a seaplane carrier, and the battleships Dunkirk, Strasbourg, Provence, and Britannia. The British sent the French-speaking Captain Cedric Holland to present the ultimatum to French Admiral Marcel Bruno Gensoul. Insulted that the British Admiral James Somerville sent this lower-ranking officer to do the negotiations, Gensoul answered by sending his lieutenant, Bernard Dufay, to do the negotiating, which led to a lot of confusion. The British demands were rejected, but the French tried to assure them that the fleet would never fall into German hands. Unfortunately, the British couldn't accept these terms, and despite neither side wanting the situation to escalate, a combination of poor communication and pressure from higher-ups resulted in a British command to sink the French fleet. British forces opened fire. Shocked, the French fired back, but were quickly outmatched, losing ship after ship. Admiral Gensoul ordered the ships to leave the harbour, but just one ship, the Strasbourg, along with a few destroyers, managed to slip away. In total, the British killed nearly 1,300 French sailors that day. Though Britain and France would continue to fight on the same side, relations between these two nations were strained for some time after the attack. Admiral Somerville called the attack the biggest political blunder of modern times and said he felt thoroughly ashamed for what happened that day. However, while things were tense between Britain and France, Britain's neutralization of the French fleet was worth it in a number of ways. Some argue that the attack earned Britain a strong and ruthless reputation on the world stage, and FDR himself said that he would have made the same decision if he'd been in Churchill's shoes. But what do you think? Is there any other unit that the fighting nations of World War II risked a lot to nullify? Were the British wrong to sink the French fleet? Should the Americans have tried to find and destroy more of the Kido Butai in revenge for Pearl Harbor? Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section below.